Hi everyone, I hope you're great. Today we will have semicolons, colons, and commas. First, you have to log in using the aplusstudent.com. Click on your name, move on to language at the grade 7. Chapter is semicolons, colons, and commas. Lesson will be use the semicolon and commas to separate clauses. Use semicolons, colons, and commas with list. Alright, so we have use comma to separate two independent clauses that are joined with a coordinating conjunction. So if you have independent clauses that are joined with a coordinating conjunction such as and or but so and but or and so, right? You have to put a comma in between them. However, if the coordinating conjunction joins verb or verb phrases in a compound predicate, a comma should not be used. So Wyatt was reserved around new people, but he was hardly shy. So we have a comma in between the coordinating conjunction and the independent clauses. Wyatt was reserved around new people but was hardly shy. So if it's joined by a verb or verb phrase, compound predicates, you cannot add a comma just like the second. So you also use comma to separate a dependent clause and independent clause when the dependent clause come first. So if you have dependent clause coming first, you have to use comma to separate them. Those dependent clauses usually start with a subordinating conjunction such as, after, although, or because. So although Wyatt was reserved around new people, he was highly shy. So if you have a dependent clause starting with any of this here, you would what? Put a comma in between them. So for semicolons, you have to use them to connect to independent clauses that are joined with a conjunctive adverb, such as consequently, however, or therefore. So we have lots of conjunctive adverbs. So we use semicolon when it is joined by two independent clause with a conjunctive adverb. Just like we have over here, Wyatt was highly shy, then we have the semicolon. Nevertheless, he was reserved around new people. So this is a conjunctive adverb. So there are two closely related independent clauses that are not joined with a coordinating conjunction. So you should complete the sentence with a semicolon. So instead of joining these two with a coordinating conjunction, either and, but, or so, it's not joined, it's joined with a conjunctive adverb. So you use a semicolon. Okay? Alright, let's look at this example. Unless you want to remain in debt forever, you need to stop succumbing to impulse purchase. So you add a comma or semicolon if needed, right? So if it's needed, you need to add any of them. So we have the dependent clause unless you want to remain in debt forever comes before the independent clause. So you should complete the sentence with a comma. Okay. That is, unless you want to remain in debt forever, you need to stop succumbing to impulse purchase. So unless also is what's used to show a dependent clause. Okay. As Richard chopped the cilantro for the chili, I shredded the cheese for the quesadillas. All right, so you can see that as here is what? It's a subordinating conjunction, so it shows the beginning of a dependent clause. I- Yeah, so you have to put a comma in between. Okay, move on to the test. All right, so it says add a comma or semicolon if needed. Otherwise, submit the text without any additional punctuation. Underground water comes from underground reservoirs called aquifers, and we rely on these sources to meet half of our water needs in the United States. So, first or the second, what's the right one here? So we have the first because we have to put a comma in between the independent clauses that has a coordinating conjunction. Okay, so Wildlick is a whistleblower website where people anonymously report illegal wildlife trade. The site may provide effective in the site may prove effective in the fight against wildlife crime. However, it requires internet access in order to be useful. So you have to add semicolon or comma if necessary. So we have however here conjunctive adverb. So we need to put semicolon. Shrek, a New Zealander sheep, went 6 years without being shorn, so his fleece weighed 60 pounds when it was finally caught. So, what do we have? Comma or semicolon? Alright, so we have comma because we have a coordinating conjunction there. So, airplane food has a reputation for being unappetizing, but the food itself may not be responsible. Researchers have discovered that higher altitude and decreased humidity dull our ability to detect flavors. So, comma or semicolon? Alright, so we have comma because we have coordinating conjunction over there. So, before Miss Rivera saw the Beechroot National Forest, she had no idea how stunning the landscape is in Idaho. So, first a second. All right, so we have what? Comma, because it starts with an a dependent clause rather. All right, so scientists believe tornadoes form due to high relative humidity and significant wind changes in the lowest region of the atmosphere. Furthermore, tornadoes only form its downdrafts are present in just the right part of the storm. So, so what do we have? First to second. All right, so we have semicolon because we have conjunctive adverb there. Okay, as Richard chopped the cilantro for the chili, I shredded the cheese for the quesadillas. So first a second. Alright, so we have comma because it starts with a dependent clause. Alright, that's it for this lesson. We'll move on to the next. If you haven't done this one, try to do it, okay? So we'll move on to use semicolons, columns, and commas. All right, so we use a colon to introduce a list after an independent clause. So after an independent clause and you want to introduce a list, that's when you use a colon. All right. If a list does not follow an independent clause, do not use punctuation to introduce it. So if it doesn't follow an independent clause, don't use punctuation. So my parents have visited much of Western Europe. This has a colon because it follows a dependent clause. So Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain. Now, my parents have visited much of Western Europe, so including it has including, so it doesn't follow a dependent clause and independent clause. So you would not use a colon rather. So if it follows, then use a colon. Now use commas to separate three or more items in a series. So if you have a series and you want to separate the items, that's when you use a comma. Put a comma after each item except for the last. So you have a series of three, you have to put a comma first here, here, and you don't put in the last one. Okay? Our speakers will be Kelvin O'Malley, Rachel Stain, and Linda Wu. So you put for each of the first two like that, but don't put in the last. Even if it's three or four or five series you have to put in all the series, but don't include it in the last, like this one. So semicolon is to separate item in a series when using comma would be unclear, such as when one or more item in the series already contain commas. So if it would be unclear to use a comma, you have to use a semicolon to separate them. Okay, such as when you've already had one item with a comma there. So our speakers will be Kevin O'Malley, an English professor, so you have to put a semicolon here. Rachel Steen, a print journalist, you put a comma, and Linda Wu, a blogger. Okay, so that's how you go about the colon, semicolons, and commas. All right, so several magnificent pieces of art have been stolen throughout history of Leonardo da Vinci, Mona Lisa, Raphael the Mute Woman, Evan Bunch, The Scream, and Vincent van Gogh's Sunflower. So we have what different series. And of course, if you use like lots of commas, it's gonna be unclear. So you have to use a semicolon in this case. Like after Leonardo da Vinci, Mona Lisa, you put a comma like that. All right, so move on to the test. So you have to add commas, semicolons, or colons if needed. Otherwise, submit the text without it. Okay? So some of history's most famous spies include Francis Walsingham, who spied for Queen Elizabeth, I. Nathan Hale, who spied during the Revolutionary War, and Belboard, who gathered intelligence during the Civil War. So first to second. So you need to add semicolon here because if you don't, it will be unclear with just commas. So you have to put semicolons in this series. An unrelenting drought in California has drained lakes, rivers, and snowpacks, so the state now relies on groundwater to meet demand. First, a second. So we have the first. According to the data from 2011 and earlier, some 20 to 32% of wild caught seafood imported into the United States was from unregulated, illegal, and unreported pirate fishing sources. So, first to second. All right, so we have the first. So if you love literature, you would likely enjoy visiting Shakespeare and Company, a bookstore in Paris, France, Yasnaya, Pollyanna, Bluetoothstone Estate in Russia, and Harry David Theorem Cabin at Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts. So first to second. All right, so we have the first. So inspired by President Franklin D. Roosevelt's 1941 Four Freedom State of the Union address, painter Norman Rockwell painted four paintings: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. So, which of them, first or second? All right, so we have a second. The Vision Center offers a complete range of optical service and products, including routine eye exam contact lenses, a large section of fashionable and affordable frame and industrial safety eyewear. First or second? Alright, so we have the second. So that's it for our lesson under semicolons, colons, and commas. Tell me if you have any questions. Alright, since we have no questions, we'll end here. Try to complete this lesson if you haven't done it, and we will see you again next time. Bye.